This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Paresa Noble. Paresa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And you're all part of the independent digital transformation movement here by being part of Transformation Ground Control. So thank you for listening, everyone that's here today. I've got a really exciting show today. I'm particularly excited about the topics at hand and the guests at hand today because we're talking a lot. Coincidentally, all the discussions are going to focus on business growth, high growth businesses, small businesses, mergers and acquisitions, and that's something I think we can all relate to, or we've all seen quite a bit of in these changing times that we're in right now. And just to give you some preview of what we'll cover here today, our first guest on the show is going to be Adam Cheatham, who's a director of strategy and transformation within Third Stage Consulting. And he's going to unpack a case study for us of a recent project that we had been working on that focuses on helping a client define its digital strategy and evaluate potential technologies in the context of extreme growth through merger and acquisition. So it's a company that started off fairly small, got private equity funding, went out and acquired a bunch of companies, and then they hired us to figure out how to create a digital strategy for this conglomerate of different companies that they had acquired. So that'll be the first guest on the show today. And then later in the show, we're also going to have Kristy Barber on. We have an interview with her. Actually, Adam, who's our first guest, is interviewing her for that discussion, focused on small and mid-sized business transformations, digital transformations in particular. So Adam is actually going to ask her a series of questions. And for those of you that don't know, Kristy Barber is a small business specialist. She manages most of our small business engagements here at Third Stage. So she's going to share some of her lessons and findings from helping small to mid-sized companies through their transformations. So the whole discussion today, the whole show, Paresa, is going to come back to business growth. It's going to be a lot of focus on mergers and acquisitions as well. And that's a topic that I know you and I have talked a bit about, and something that's been in the news quite a bit lately as far as companies going out and acquiring other companies. But what are some of your findings? I know you've done some research on this topic here recently.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think the pandemic has really shined a light on the healthcare industry. And Forbes recently put out an article talking about their predictions for what mergers and acquisitions will look like in 2021. And a lot of it was geared toward the healthcare industry. I mean, I don't know about our listeners or you, Eric, but, when I think about businesses and organizations, the healthcare industry isn't the first thing that comes to mind. So it's interesting to read this because, you're looking at your doctor's office as, where you go to get care. But it's a business, and they're operating to drive profits on their bottom line and figure out how to optimize their operations, right? So when you look at this kind of perspective that Forbes recently put out, they're thinking that, obviously the pandemic has put such a strain on the healthcare system. Surgeries have taken a back seat because there's COVID patients coming in. So things have been shaken up a bit. And at the end of the day, the goal or purpose of a merger or acquisition is to increase efficiencies, figure out how to streamline operations by kind of going bigger. And that's the thought here. So their thought is in 2021, you're probably going to see doctors' offices, urgent cares, hospitals, et cetera, merging to be part of a greater healthcare system. And in hopes that it will improve the quality of care while lowering costs, So I think ultimately when you look at, where the world was going already, people are also looking for that one-stop shop. How can I consolidate my trip to the grocery store and run my errands, etc.? So I think that's another perspective that they shared in this article is, you're going to see retail stores, drugstores, etc., people who aren't, or not people, but organizations who aren't necessarily in the healthcare industry as is, such as the Walmarts, the Walgreens. They're going to be adding those little clinics, those, different outlets so that people can consolidate their trips. And that's only going to be intensified with the pandemic because you have the added risk of exposure the more places that you go, right? So it's interesting to see, for example, if you look at today's urgent cares versus maybe 5-10 years ago, our urgent care nearby, it used to be the place that you went if you had an emergency, right? You have a broken wrist or something and you need help right away, you go there. But now they are also doing annual checkups. They have, a family care physician, and, it's just kind of pivoting and adjusting to the times. And I think this pandemic has definitely been a catalyst. So definitely interesting to see that perspective on the healthcare system. And, ultimately it's all a good thing, right? Because it improves the level of care. Like if these hospitals and these healthcare facilities are able to operate in a more streamlined fashion, that's better for everybody. It's better for them. They're making more money. It's better for the patients because they're getting better care. Would you say that's kind of the same story outside of the healthcare system? I mean, looking at the whole purpose of a merger and acquisition, would you say that businesses are acquiring each other for the purpose of streamlining?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. And especially in today's day and age with the economy the way it is, it's in many ways, and not just in healthcare, but other industries too, like you said, it's created sort of some winners and losers in the space. So you've got some companies that are doing extremely well, that are extremely profitable. Maybe they're essential businesses like healthcare. And so they're growing and they have more resources at their disposal, like cash, to go buy other companies, or they're getting private equity money to go buy other companies. And anytime you see a stressful economic situation, I know COVID's been more of a health concern, and that's been the focus for a lot of us, has been the health side of it. In addition to that, you also have the economic impact of how that's affecting the economy. And it is creating vulnerabilities for some organizations that are looking for a lifeline, and they're more willing to be bought by a private equity firm or another company. So anytime you see economic turmoil, usually that leads to a lot of M&A activity, and I think that's what we're seeing here. But the thing that's really interesting is, with healthcare, like in the example you're talking about, they're doing it as a way to streamline operations, become more profitable, and really create more scale. But what's interesting is as you were talking about that, I was thinking about how, in addition to scale and profitability, healthcare companies need to be super flexible, and they need to be able to adapt quickly to whatever might happen, pandemic-wise or otherwise. So it's always an interesting trade-off that organizations have to make between scale and efficiency versus flexibility, patient experience, or customer experience, and really focusing on meeting the needs of customers. And those two things sometimes are in direct conflict. So it's more of a question or an observation than anything. But I don't know if you saw anything related to that in your research or findings.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you're looking at two sides of the spectrum, right? Like you have your streamlined operations, making things kind of run a little more smoothly, optimizing your dollars. But then also it's, oftentimes you'll have to lean out, I imagine, whether it's the healthcare industry or any industry, really. If you're buying a business, you're probably going to make changes to that business. And, I'm curious about the pros and cons of it too, because obviously you're not going to buy a business if the pros don't outweigh the cons, right? But from an objective perspective, from someone who's outside looking in, I guess my question is, do you guys often see people losing their jobs if they go through an acquisition? To what extent do the changes take place after an M&A?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, I guess. It's a mix. So I'd say 10 or 20 years ago, earlier in my career, it was pretty common to see layoffs as part of an M&A event or even any sort of transformation, whether it's a reorg or a big, massive process improvement initiative. I'd say 10 or 20 years ago, you were more likely to see significant layoffs as a result of those activities. Now, and I honestly don't know why this is, or I don't know if this is rooted in any sort of broader data that could back this, but this is just more qualitative observations. But it seems like more recently that's less common to have big layoffs. Certainly there's distressed companies that are losing money, they're out laying off people, and we're seeing a lot of organizations lay off people, throughout the pandemic. But generally, we're not seeing, at least in our experience, we're not seeing that be a result of some sort of M&A event or consolidation of companies. And maybe that the opportunity is there and they're not taking advantage of it, or it could be that the organizations are still continuing to grow and there's going to be a need for those people, but they just don't need to hire as fast in the future as they continue the growth.
Right. Well, that's good news to hear that it's kind of pivoted and changed since a few years back. Because I would imagine if you're a smaller business or a smaller organization, whether you're in healthcare or another industry, it would almost be a saving grace if you're struggling to stay afloat and then you have someone come in and buy you out. That's almost the best case scenario.
Yeah, someone that could help you get to the next level or help you be more profitable. And even outside of healthcare, you see that a lot with a lot of organizations. In fact, right before this podcast, I was on a call with a potential client in the Middle East who is a very large company, and they've grown primarily through going out and acquiring all these different types of companies. Some of them in healthcare, but most of them in other industries like food and automotive, manufacturing. They even have a taxi business in the region. So it's and this is obviously they've fueled most of their growth even pre-COVID, but they continue to go out and acquire these new companies. But it is fascinating to see how, on one hand, you have the entrepreneurial spirit that kind of fuels a lot of economic activity throughout the world, and that gets you to a certain point. But then on the other hand, you've got private equity and big companies out there that are trying to buy up these smaller companies to really take them to the next level. So it's an interesting dichotomy, I guess you'd say, that they kind of feed off each other, and it's pretty interesting.
That's super interesting. And this client, I mean, it sounds like they're buying across various industries, so that's fascinating.
Yeah,
sounds hard to manage, but sounds like they're building an empire, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, just the thought of like a food company and a taxi company being in this, how do you manage those two things effectively, and the question becomes, and actually we were talking about this in the conversation, of how do you leverage the potential efficiency gains by not having a separate IT department for each of those businesses or separate finance department or whatever the case may be. So a lot of, scale and standardization and efficiency opportunities. But to your point, even if there's no layoffs, and whether it's with this company we're working with or any other company out there, usually the impacts are pretty significant to the people and the processes within the organization.
Sure, just how like their day-to-day is run, etc. I could see that, definitely. Well, hey, maybe this client can start delivering food with their taxis.
No, there you go. Kind of taking Uber and Uber Eats and Grubhub and all those things to the next level of actually fully integrated supply chain. Actually, they should just go out and buy Uber Eats or Grubhub or one of those apps, and then they completely own the entire thing there.
Own the whole segment.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. Well, good. So yeah, this will be an interesting segue into the rest of the show here today, where we're going to cover that whole gamut of sort of the evolution of small business to large business. And when we come back from a quick break, we're going to cover with Adam Cheatham from Third Stage a recent case study for a client we're working with to help them through their digital transformation, particularly on the front end of helping them define their strategy and roadmap and software evaluation for some of these acquisitions they've gone out and made. And like I said, we'll go even further downstream and focusing on small and mid-market companies later in the show with an interview with Kristy Barber. But one other thing that you and I were talking about, Paresa, that I just want to share with our listeners, for those that are interested in this whole concept of small and mid-market transformations, We're actually hosting a workshop tomorrow, which we're recording this, or we're live here on February 24th. Tomorrow on February 25th, we're doing a full throttle workshop that's focused specifically on small and mid-market transformation. So if you're listening to this in time, if you're listening to this live or prior to February 25th, be sure to visit our website. I'll include a link below to register for that. If you miss it and you're listening to this on demand after February 25th, just email us. We'll make sure to get you a recording of that session. But so it'll be a good workshop for those that are interested, and so that'll be a good topic of conversation there. So just more of an FYI for everyone here. But we're gonna take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll be with Adam Cheatham. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Like I should, when in Durga, walk around the neighborhood, feeling blessed, never stressed.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, your podcast for everything digital and business transformation. You can find us live on YouTube every Wednesday at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. London time, or 11 p.m. Hong Kong time. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, whatever your platform of choice is. And our next guest, I'm excited to bring on. He's been on the show before. It's someone I work with very closely on a daily basis. He's a director at Third Stage, a director of strategy and transformation, and he oversees several of our clients at any given time. He's overseeing multiple project teams and making sure that the teams are delivering what they should be and making sure our clients are happy and providing his subject matter expertise. So he's got a pretty broad view into the market and works with a lot of different companies. And we're going to dive into one client case study in particular that's focused on sort of that mid-market. They're a company that started off as a mom and pop. They got some private equity funding. They went out and acquired a bunch of other mom and pops and became a sort of conglomerate. And they reached out to us looking for help on how to plan their digital transformation strategy and roadmap. And so we're going to ask Adam some questions about that, some lessons learned, what some things are to think about. And the beauty of everything we're talking about here today is that this is relevant whether you're a small company, mid-market, whether you're a large organization. A lot of these lessons are applicable across the board, but we're kind of diving in and focusing on the small and mid-market in particular. So excited to have Adam on the show. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So Adam, you're a director within our company and you've worked with some wide variety of clients. And there's one in particular that we're going to talk about here today. There's a lot of themes that we want to touch on here as far as, a high growth company, a private equity owned company that's growing through acquisition. Maybe to start off, maybe just tell us a little bit about the client and give us an understanding of the size and scope and complexity of the clients themselves.
So this particular client had in the ballpark of 3,500 employees, 42 locations rather across North America. So an international spread that had grown by acquisition largely. They had over a dozen different acquisitions that grew their company that led to just as many more brands to have to worry about with regard to product lines. All of those companies themselves had different ways of doing things, and bringing them together under one model was really one of their challenges, particularly from a digital space perspective. So large company, somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion with some aggressive growth goals. They were private equity owned. They had some interesting wrinkles in it as well. We had a lot of fun with that project, and I'm looking forward to telling you more about it.
Great. So why did they reach out to us? What was the problem statement of what they were trying to solve when they first reached out to us and hired us to help them through the transformation?
Yeah, all of their brands as they acquired them, were on different versions of different software. Some of them more mature than others. One of them is mature as having being up on the most recent versions of SAP ECC6 just before HANA came out, and then others on antiquated green screen technology, old Epicor platforms and stuff like that. And they were really looking to figure out how it is they might roll out one software across all the companies.
Right. Yeah, and really build on and leverage some of the technology they had, but at the same time look at ways to upgrade that and improve that over time. So what in this first phase of work, and we're kind of honing in here on the first evaluation and call it the strategy and evaluation stage of the project, what was the scope of what we did or what the client asked us to do for them?
Yeah, so we started out by visiting a dozen of their locations to document their business processes. What they had asked us to do was find out the difference between what it is would be covered in a digital transformation and how they could solve things with technology. Just as much they wanted to be able to understand how they would solve some of their problems with a little bit more synergy amongst the different divisions, locations, and brands. They also had some significant challenges with their organizational structure. From location to location, titles were different names. The structure, the reporting structure was different, even to the point where some had many more levels than other locations, and some were relatively flat, and trying to figure out a way of handling that from not just a digital transformation perspective, but the work streams that come from the business processes and the organizational change to support those types of transformational change in the digital space.
Right. So I think you just started to answer this question, but maybe you can dive into a little bit more. But what are some of the challenges that they were trying to address by going through that evaluation? You mentioned processes, you mentioned organizational design or consistency, between the different areas. Were there certain overarching goals or objectives they were trying to accomplish with the transformation overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, what they wanted to be able to do was manufacture and share manufacturing processes and share distribution models across their 42 locations. And they weren't able to do that because their systems were different. And what they were trying to figure out from a technological perspective, how that works, where, you could manufacture some brands in some locations, but not others. And even to the point where if brand A could be manufactured in 6 places, but it couldn't be distributed through other models that brand B shared with brand A as far as manufacturing was concerned, it was really kind of haphazard and pieced together a little bit randomly almost, it seemed, other than the fact that you had a lot of silos that came in from that acquisition-based structure. So what they brought us in to focus on was how can we use technology to also enable our business processes, because I want to be able to manufacture a brand that is housed on the East Coast and my West Coast offices and facilities so that I can distribute that on the West Coast and be more localized in my structure rather than sending it across the country to accommodate some of the customer base needs on that. And, the software systems really hamstrung them on that, because not only were they different, but they were pretty rudimentary in the idea that they worked well locally. But to have them communicate with other locations was really hard, and you had folks that were logging into several different green screen systems just to complete different orders across different locations.
So there's a organizational and operational consistency that they're striving for. You talked about the organization, the organizational piece of it, and just trying to tie that together. But then there's also in addition to the distribution challenges they had with being siloed in that way, there's also the customer experience that they focused on too, right? As far as having these different brands that they had gone out and acquired, but they're still sort of in the marketplace perceived or operationally delivered as different entities or completely different brands or companies. Is that true? And if so, how did that materialize in the evaluation?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So you have different brands that accommodate different parts of a construction model, we'll call it. And so you have some brands that can handle specific pieces of a build, and some brands that can handle others. And if you want to sell all pieces of one build to one customer, they were unable to invoice that appropriately, and they were unable to ship it in a way where they could plan for it. And so when you had somebody that's buying a couple parts here and there, customer experience model isn't that big a deal. But when you have somebody like a major construction firm who wants to build a lot of wants to put together a high number of builds, and you want to be the contract on that, being able to say, I can cover all of those materials efficiently and effectively without having to send 10 different invoices for 10 different parts of one build, it makes it difficult to show that prospect that you can handle their needs. And then after that, it also makes it difficult to manage a customer experience that's streamlined to the point where that customer knows who they're dealing with, right? Like if my parent company is called one thing, and I've got a dozen different acquisitions, all with different brands, and then get a dozen different invoices, there's a level of confusion that says, well, where did this company come from? I've got a contract with these guys. Why am I getting something from some random different company? It's a lot more difficult to set up and to get going, and at some point that customer experience becomes prohibitively difficult to work with, to the point where they're likely to choose somebody else for business.
Yeah. And were they also focused on trying to be able to cross-sell different products, or were these totally different product lines?
Complementary products, substitute products, different levels of quality, right? Like if you want to do different builds, and you want to be able to have some of them at a standard quality and some of them at a premium quality, being able to handle those different levels of the order, that just adds a level of complexity that they were dealing with that I oversimplified in my example. But you start to think about the number of layers that go into that. Okay, well, if I get this set and that set, do they fit together? And if they do fit together, do I need some type of another piece to make it all go? And that cross-selling opportunity to say, hey, I see you've got 10 widgets. We've also got these pieces that tie those 10 widgets into one super widget. Would you like to buy that? It's going to save you money later, and construction materials and time and all that stuff. Being able to see that was impossible for them.
Right. Well, good. That's interesting. A good overview of the situation. And when we come back from a quick break, I want to ask you some more questions and dive into a little bit more on the operational and organizational change side of things, and then bring it full circle and talk about some of the technology pieces. So I'm here with Adam Cheatham from Third Stage Consulting. We're going over a case study here, merger and acquisition related, and a digital strategy and software evaluation, and overall operational and organizational assessment as well. We'll be right back after a quick break. You're listening to the Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Adam Cheatham, Director of Strategy and Transformation at Third Stage Consulting. We're going over a case study here of a a high growth, mid-sized company in the construction and remodeling industry, and their some of the challenges they were experiencing that we've helped them through. Before we do that, though, just a couple quick things. One is if you're on social media, if you are on YouTube or Twitter, or LinkedIn, or Facebook, be sure to follow Third Stage there. We put out content on a daily basis. If you like content like this, other case studies and other types of content that are meant to help you with your digital and business transformation, be sure to follow us on social media. You can also follow me personally. You can find me at Eric Kimberling. Same with Adam Cheatham. You can follow him or connect with him on LinkedIn as well. And we'll get back to it. So Adam, before the break, we were talking about just some of the nuances of this organization, the fact that they were high growth, they went out and acquired a bunch of companies, and they were trying to create a common operating model and the way they handled distribution, as well as a common customer experience for people that were dealing with some of the different brands that they had acquired. One thing that was interesting about this client that I recall is they not only did they go through a bunch of acquisition, but it's a highly fragmented industry where a lot of mom and pops are kind of dominating the industry. And so their strategy as a company was to get private equity money and go out and acquire all these companies and really create some critical mass and scale that is pretty uncommon in this particular industry. What kind of cultural nuances did that create as far as just having these mom and pops that were now suddenly part of this bigger organization? Not huge by any means, but to the average mom and pop, it probably felt a bit huge. So any nuances or things that we observed on the organizational change or cultural side of things there?
Yeah, I'd say that the biggest thing is they got very good at getting very lean and knowing where to cut the fat. So when they would acquire new companies, that would be their first order of business. Let's come in and let's cut the fat. So that created a cultural competition within the idea of a digital transformation and a standardization, in that every piece of the organization was made as lean as it could be based on what was available. So when you start to try to mix and match, when you start to consolidate folks into one organization, there's a little bit of almost an organizational tax that you pay for keeping everything tied together. And they were very lean at the local level. And what that did was it not only created an environment of heroes that would step in and do whatever it is they could to do their job, but also created kind of a sense of community at the very localized level to say, we're all in this together. It did create a little bit of a difficulty in trying to get them to speak to different brands and different locations because of that. It's very decentralized. And I'd say that one of the things that was really difficult for us is helping them align on, if I need to talk to somebody about what it is they've learned and how it is they're doing this brand or that brand at the other location, who do I talk to? They all have different titles. They all call themselves different things. And if I'm an operations manager, do I talk to the production manager? Do I talk to the scheduling manager? Am I looking for a production scheduling manager? Who am I looking for? And trying to figure out where those connections were at the more network type of level was difficult for them. And so we worked with them on identifying some of the mismatches in titles and stuff like that, so that we could get to the point where those a bit more standard people knew who to talk to and what that looked like. Because at the end of the day, their structure was always get in, cut the fat, and make it lean and efficient. And that was a very localized model for them. And taking a cookie cutter approach wasn't useful for them. So it made their processes and their organizations at all the levels, in all the different offices, fairly disparate.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that could happen, especially when you're talking about, 13 companies that they went out and acquired. You're probably going to have 13 different ways of operating, 13 cultures, 13 different customer experiences, and all this stuff you're going to have to sort of reconcile and validate. When you look at some of the common challenges of these sorts of projects, what were some of the specific challenges that this organization, not that this organization was facing pre us coming in, but during the evaluation, what were some of the challenges that we uncovered? And I know you've touched on some of this already, but what are some of the additional challenges that may have been uncovered during this evaluation?
Yeah, I'd say that it's always easier to know that you're dealing with a company that's owned by private equity early rather than late. And we found out later in the game when they pulled in another CFO, what the level of involvement from their private equity firm was. Because a lot of times you know it up front, but you don't know what this private equity firm wants to be involved in, what they don't, and what their model is, right? So some private equity firms want to buy something and hold it for long enough to grow it and then resell it. Others want to come in and kind of do a fix and flip. And there are 100 different strategies in between. And for this one, without directly addressing the actual model that they were looking for, we had some challenges in understanding what it is that direction was going to become, and what the overall model here was. Is this I want to own it for a little while and hold it? Do I want to come in and fix some things and sell it? Do I want to do something where I want to turn it into a cash cow and keep it lean the way that it already is, and see what I can't squeeze out of it? There's so many different options. I know that private equity firms do two things really well: buy things and sell things. But there's a period during which you have to account for the holdings period, and understanding the impact of that and the trajectory of it up front would have been more helpful.
Right. So when you compare this client or compared to other clients that maybe aren't private equity owned, are there any not nuances, but any differences, material differences in the way those companies tend to operate and their expectations around their digital strategy and their overall transformation versus one that's not private equity owned? Or were there any common patterns you see with those types of PE firms like this client?
Yeah, I think that the ones that aren't private equity owned don't often have an exit strategy, and so their goal is, let's say for example a family owned business. That business is going to remain in the family forever. And so the goal here is to just own it and use it as income. And that there's nothing wrong with that model. It's a very good one. We've got a lot of fantastic clients that are family owned, and they are there to continue to be that way. There are others that are private equity owned that there are a couple different styles in there. There's the private equity style, which is I want to come in and I want to be very high level and just make some quick decisions and get out. We see that particularly with a lot of startup type of firms where they've got some investment funds. They look, I just want to get in here. I want to start a business. I want to get it funded. I want to slap in an ERP, do some process management, and get out. My thought about being in this for more than 5 years is that's terrifying to me. There are others that want to get more meticulously involved at the more granular level, and they want to start looking at all of the data and all of the nuances so that they can tweak and tinker and find out not just where the low-hanging fruit is, but where some of the more the harder to find dollars are, and get those out of it too. And none of these approaches are wrong. Some of the companies that we work with are publicly owned. They're publicly traded, and the ownership on that is different as well, and the approach there is also different. So it's just a matter of wanting to know what your strategy is one of the things that I try to target early, because where are you headed? How are we doing this? If you can help me understand what it is you want from your business, I can help figure out how it is you can transform to meet those needs.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Those small little nuances can make a big difference, and it certainly affects how we help a client through the sort of evaluation and strategic planning phase. So when we come to the technology piece of it then, so this is a organization that had, in addition to acquiring these other entities, these 13 other companies, along with those acquisitions, in many cases came some technologies that were already in place. As it relates to the evaluation we did and sort of where our recommendation landed on how to navigate the decision forward, whether to keep one or more of the systems they already had or go out to the market and look for something entirely different. Where did we land on that? So maybe help us just walk us through at a high level how we made that recommendation?
Yeah, I think that the concept of taking the existing most advanced software and format painting it across the rest of the company, we found was not going to be as effective as they thought. The quote unquote gold standard company had a lot of process challenges on their own, and they had a lot of process improvement opportunities they needed to lean into there. And they might think about, one of our suggestions was that they might think about re-implementing that software for them before rolling it out to others. That's a difficult thing for a company to hear, that they might need to do that over because they did it and created some inefficiencies. But it was a message that we had to share. And then from a perspective of the less sophisticated locations, from a software perspective, we had a number of very targeted organizational and process-oriented improvements that needed to be dug into and identified in a manner which was deliberate, so that you can start creating more gold standards and you can start bringing people in. The point that I'm trying to make here is that we suggested a phased approach in not just by work stream, but by location, to say, all right, you've got, we'll speak to it regionally, we'll call it that. You've got, let's say, the New England area is the area that is the gold standard. They've got some things to do to get better, and let's do that, and then get the software up and running for them in a way that allows their process improvements to be copied and pasted across locations. And then you can start talking about Canada, and then you can start talking about maybe the Midwest or the Southwest, and the areas that are a little bit smaller lift, so we can start bringing them onto this one software system. And then you start talking about the ones that are a little bit larger lift as far as process and organization, and bringing them into the process, bringing them into the organizational model, and then giving them the software tool. And that's the approach that we had suggested for them.
Right. Makes sense based on who they are and where they're headed. So just to wrap things up, or to tie it all together, what if you were to give a couple pieces of advice to someone who's maybe in a similar situation? Maybe they're a multinational company, or maybe they're just multi-site, or they have diverse operations, complex operations, or they've acquired other companies. So call it a fairly complex or far from a vanilla type of organization. What sorts of advice would you give as those types of organizations are starting their transformation journey?
I would say first and foremost that having an outside eye on things, that sees things from a perspective that isn't dug into the weeds and isn't biased by direct experience with one model or another, and can see the whole breadth of things is an important point of view. It's not the only point of view, but it is something that is very helpful. So don't hesitate to reach out to somebody for help. The next part that I would say is don't ignore your people. When you start thinking about how you might standardize processes, your people will be impacted by that. That some of them are going to have great ideas on how it is they can help with that, and they're going to want to be a part of it. I would say that involving them and engaging them is important. Others are going to need to understand what it is that change looks like, and why you're taking somebody else's model and in their interpretation cramming it down their throat. I would be aware of those scenarios. And the last thing is that technology should enable your business and the things that you're looking to achieve. It's to take a single technology and say, well, lots of people have this technology. It works great for these guys. Just because it works great for those guys doesn't mean they're using it as effectively and efficiently as they can either. And once you put processes in a system, it's really hard to undo those. It's much easier to put processes in place before the system comes, and then use the system to reinforce those processes.
Yeah, that's a great closing comment. I mean, once the technology gets baked, it's a lot harder to change those processes, and you have a lot less flexibility at that point. So the more you can do to define those processes up front before the technology gets baked into the organization, the better off you're going to be. So that's good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Adam. Really appreciate you being here.
No problem. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate you having me. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. And we'll have you again soon. And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
I've got the cash if you've got the hugs. It's been a...
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Paresa Noble. I'm Eric Kimberling with Third Stage Consulting. And again, you can find us live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern U.S. time on YouTube, which is 3 p.m. London, 11 p.m. Hong Kong. Please also subscribe to us on Google, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you listen to podcasts. And thanks for being here. And so, Paresa, that was a really interesting case study we had with Adam, and actually a client that I really enjoyed working with and have enjoyed getting to know over time. And very fascinating case study, and really interesting how they've kind of taken this mom and pop fragmented industry and now consolidated it into more of a bigger billion-dollar plus type company. So what are some of your observations or questions that you had after hearing Adam's discussion?
Yeah, well, it's fascinating. You guys mentioned 13 different acquisitions. So I'm wrapping my head around how they manage that. That's 13 different teams, different business processes, different cultures. So I thought that was fascinating because, when I've thought about mergers and acquisitions, I think about, okay, one company's buying another company. They're going to integrate everything about their culture to their systems. But when you throw in 13 different businesses and processes, et cetera, I imagine that's a challenge, but I love how Adam was talking about it because it was fun for him. He enjoyed it, which that's why you guys do what you do and why you're so good at it. But I'm curious about just like the organizational change management aspect of that. What did you guys say to the team or to the person that was heading up the OCM side of integrating and bringing everything together to become one from 13?
Yeah, good observation, by the way, because, change management and the different cultures are an extremely important part of just business growth in general, but especially when you get into mergers and acquisitions. There's been plenty of studies out there over the years that have shown that culture and cultural clashes are the number one reason why mergers and acquisitions fail so often. And so, to your point, when you bring on 13, you're not just talking one, now you're talking about 13 different cultures. You've got to figure out a way to get those aligned. And inevitably, even if you're in the same industry like these guys and gals are, all 13 companies are in the same, generally doing the same thing, same industry, different brands. But you can still have very different cultures, very different operating models, very different ways of thinking and being as an organization. And so you've got to figure out how to get those aligned. But as far as what you say to the change management person or people on a project like that, the first thing is just to understand a lay of the land before jumping to conclusions or coming up with some sort of canned solution for how to address those changes. So, in other words, taking your question a step further is really important to effective change management, which is how are these companies different? How do we want them to look in the future to be more common or consistent? And what is that plan or strategy to help get us there? And I think a lot of times people aren't thinking about that when they go out and acquire other companies or when they're going through business growth. They're just thinking, we're all on the same page, wanting to grow the company and be successful. So, it's as simple as that. So that's the big part of it, is just understanding the lay of the land, understanding where you want to go, and then ultimately what's the customized strategy that's going to help you get there based on who you are today and where you're trying to be tomorrow across, those 13 different organizations or cultures that they were dealing with in this case.
Right. That sounds familiar. I mean, across any digital transformation, it's knowing where you're going, and that's, the why, the meat of your strategy. So that makes sense. And I know we've talked a lot about resistance to change from your employees, from people on your team, from the bottom line. Maybe we can kind of talk about that and see how that impacts a merger and acquisition, specifically when there's so many different businesses that are being consolidated. I mean, we've talked about how there's intentional resistance and unintentional resistance to people who are vocally against, changing the way they operate their day to day, how they manage their tasks, et cetera, et cetera. But then you also have the people who may seem like they're on board, but then when it comes down to it, they're still married to their old processes. So I imagine you see that. I mean, do you see that 13-fold if it's a scenario like this, or would you say it's pretty consistent with, regardless of if you have 2 companies merging or 20? Is it the same story?
It's same story, but I'd say more exponential when you have 13 versus 2. But I think regardless of how extreme the resistance is, I think the most important thing for executives is to recognize that there is going to be resistance to change. And I think that's a big mistake a lot of companies make, is people are on board with this. They totally get it. They totally want this change. They totally see the value in combining with another company or changing our processes or implementing new technologies, whatever the change may be. And that could be true on the surface. They, of course, could be lying to you and telling you what you want to hear as an executive or as a leader. But the more common thing we see is that they really do believe that. But then once you start getting into the nuts and bolts of what this change is going to entail, that's where people start becoming alarmed. And when people become alarmed or threatened or start to take it personally, for example, if I feel like my job's going to go away, or you're going to change my job, or you're going to take something away from me, even if you don't take my job away, you might take away something that I take pride in or took pride in doing for 20 years. Now you're going to make me change that, or automate it with new technology, or do it the way this new parent company is going to do it, whatever it may be. Once I start to feel threatened in that way, that's where I start to resist change. It may not be malicious or that I want to undermine the success of the company, but I'm just protecting myself at that point. So I think that's to your point about intentional versus unintentional resistance. That's obviously the underlying unintentional resistance. I'm not doing it because I want to be difficult. I'm doing it because I'm threatened. I'm doing it because you're changing the way I've always operated, and you're doing it pretty abruptly, because usually, especially when you've got PE money involved and private equity firms involved, usually they're very aggressive about changing and changing quickly, because oftentimes they're looking to build up something, scale it up, and then sell it to someone else. And they've got a time frame that they're working within. So, you combine all those dynamics, and that can create a lot of change management challenges to your point.
Yeah, that takes me back to, I had a role in corporate America where I was helping run their events program, and we were keeping track of multiple event deliverables and marketing deliverables, all on an Excel spreadsheet. And it was so complicated, but it was the comfort zone. So then when the thought or the idea of automating came up, and doing something different, it took me a second to really adopt that new process, just because you're in your comfort zone. I think sometimes maybe it's not even a feeling of being threatened. It's a feeling of you don't want to leave your comfort zone and change what you've been doing for years, because you've gotten good at doing it this way, and now you have to pivot. So I could definitely see that playing into any digital transformation, and holding back the go live aspect of it, and keeping it from maximizing. So, but I'm curious, because you also said, talking about private equity firms. So Adam was talking about, obviously every business is different. You have private equity firms, you have family-owned firms, you have publicly owned firms. So looking at a PE firm specifically, there's a couple different ways that you could go about it. You could be a very hands-on, involved kind of leadership team where you come in and tweak the processes and get really focused and granular, or you could be high level and, kind of manage from afar and want to get out in less than 5 years. And I think a lot of that plays into, again, going back to what's the vision, what's the strategy, what's that core, 5 to 10 year plan that's going to facilitate where your business goes. So talk about how, I guess, the general business strategy translate into digital strategy, specifically as it pertains to ERP implementation. We've talked about how digital strategy and business strategy are almost interchangeable at this point, but I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, the last point is really important, which is that digital strategy, business strategy, you can't really do one without the other, or you shouldn't try to do one without the other. The pitfall that a lot of companies fall into is they try to do digital transformation or digital strategy for technology's sake, and they focus too much on technology trends or what they could be using technology for. That stuff's important, but to your point about business strategy, it all needs to be aligned. And the way we typically do it is, first of all, the interesting experience of working with so many clients across the world in our three main regions that we operate from as a company is that you see so many companies that they actually do have a clear vision of what they want to be when they grow up. It's pretty rare that we go into a company and they're just a complete disaster, or they have no strategic vision or focus. It's pretty rare. I mean, usually they know where they're headed. They know what's gotten them to where they are. They know what they want to accomplish. You talk to the CEO or the C-level people, and they have usually pretty good alignment on what the areas of focus are as an organization. But where they really struggle for the most part, and this is why they hire us in many cases, is because they can't figure out how to translate that higher level vision and strategy into something that's tactical and tangible in a strategy, a digital strategy and plan that's aligned with that overall business strategy. So that's the tricky part. And so what we do is, the first thing we do with any digital transformation is understand their business strategy, clearly define the business strategy, and then start to unpack that strategy in the context of digital. So how does digital support that strategy? And this is where I think software vendors can be difficult, or they can cause problems in the industry, because they're coming at it from more, here's our technology, you should buy our technology. And a business needs to be thinking about, well, here's our business, how's technology going to best align or fit our business? And those two things don't always integrate well. And so it's a matter of trying to navigate what the best answer is. So back to your question, the strategy articulation, starting with that business strategy, then unpacking it and defining it more granular in terms of what does that mean for our digital transformation. Just to give you a really quick example, especially since we're talking about private equity, merger and acquisition, high growth companies, a lot of times companies in the mid-market that are scaling are focused on trying to standardize their operations, and they want to drive efficiency. They want to create a more common customer experience for their customers, and they want to start acting like one company. Let's just say those are some of the high-level objectives or strategic imperatives for a company. Then we look at, okay, well, what's the digital strategy that's going to help them get there? If they've got a bunch of legacy systems that have been homegrown over the years and they're all using different technologies, now they're looking to standardize, then maybe it's a common enterprise-wide ERP system. Or if, by contrast, the objective of the company is to remain flexible and act as more of a holding company with disparate, independently operated businesses, then a big enterprise-wide ERP system may not make sense. It may be more of a best-of-breed approach to finding CRM for customer and sales automation, or a HCM system like a human capital management or HR system might be more applicable. And so you really have to align it in that way. And so I'm summarizing very quickly what takes time, but that's in general what we try to do to unpack and align digital strategy with the business strategy.
Interesting. That makes sense. And I mean, while we're on the topic of strategy, I've learned so much about private equity firms, I feel like, in the recent weeks, just based on our podcast. But, I feel like a digital strategy could be a great way to improve your ROI if you're a private equity firm, right? So my thought is, what are some strategies that private equity firms come to the table with? Could it be, maybe we revamp the ERP system and that'll increase efficiencies and hopefully increase revenue? Could it be, let's go buy a bunch of small businesses and see how we can kind of grow in that sense and broaden our reach? What have you seen? It sounds like you guys have worked with a lot of private equity firms. What have you seen these guys do to help increase their ROI?
Well, a lot of it's been, usually there's sort of an initial burst of acquisition. So they go out and buy some companies, and it may not happen all at once, but over time they go out and acquire all these companies. And then ultimately what ends up happening oftentimes is these PE firms and the management teams of these high growth companies realize that, okay, great, we've scaled now, we've scaled up our revenue, but now we've created all these other problems. Now we've got disparate operations. Customers feel like they're dealing with different companies. Our employees are acting like different teams. We're not sharing or leveraging the true scale of our organization through, better procurement processes and being able to drive down our procurement costs, or just even consolidated visibility into the operations. We're not taking advantage of the fact that now we should be able to see what's happening across the enterprise. Now we're still acting as separate entities. So usually they reach some sort of tipping point that says, okay, we've got us to this point, but to really knock it out of the park and to get that ROI that you're talking about, Paresa, is, now we've got to look at how do we potentially either standardize operations. In some cases, maybe we move to shared service models for our IT and HR functions, for example, or accounting. Those are three areas where oftentimes high growth companies will say, okay, we don't need 5 different accounting departments or 5 different IT departments just because we went out and acquired these different companies. So they start to look to ways selectively to start to standardize through a shared service model. So that's one way, is that shared services model can really drive down costs, drive down efficiency, and really allow the company to enjoy the benefits or reap the benefits of being a larger company as opposed to when they were a smaller company. The other part of it is just, really looking at opportunities to use technology to create a integrated set of operations and organization, just being able to collaborate better, provide better customer service, all that stuff. And so ultimately it's going to come down to what the goals and objectives of the PE firm are. The ones that are shorter term, short-sighted, they're trying to just flip the company. They're going to have totally different objectives than the ones that might be looking at it more longer term. But either way, you just want to make sure you've got that alignment with your overall strategy. And that's probably the most important thing, is just make sure whether your strategy is right or wrong isn't as important as whether or not your digital strategy is aligned with that strategy.
Right. Alignment is key for sure. That makes sense. And I mean, I'm excited for our next segment too, because we're going to be talking about small business. So, that thought of them buying different small businesses over time, we're looking at the flip side of it now. If you're a small business and your exit strategy is to build it to a place where you can sell it off, maybe it's something to consider looking at your digital strategy and positioning yourself as such.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're kind of, in today's show, we're sort of rewinding now in the cycle. We're kind of starting off with talking about what happens when you're successful. You've grown the company, you've got PE firms involved, you've got acquisitions. Now we're kind of going back to the beginning. What do we do to get to that point to where we've experienced enough growth and success to where maybe we are part of a merger and acquisition or some sort of big growth activity. And so our next guest that we'll have on right after a quick break will be to have Adam back on. He's actually going to have a discussion with Kristy Barber. And Kristy is a small business manager on our team and has dealt with a lot of small business transformations. So we'll have a good discussion of what to do to get to that level. You might be on QuickBooks now or using some basic accounting software, basic technologies, and you're looking to how do we scale to get to that next level of growth. So we're going to talk about that here when we get back from a quick break here on Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm Eric Kimberling here with Paresa Noble, and very excited to have on our next guest. You have already heard from Adam Cheatham earlier in the show. We're going to bring him on again. He had actually recently conducted an interview with Kristy Barber, a video interview discussing small business and digital transformation and some of the nuances of going through a digital or business transformation if you're a small or mid-market company. And which you think about, a majority of the companies out there are smaller or mid-sized type companies. And so we're going to turn it over to Adam. We're going to play you this clip from this pre-recorded interview that we did. But it's a very good discussion. I really like the discussion because it's kind of getting back to the basics or the fundamentals of what it takes to be successful in a transformation if you're a small business, and some of the things that are unique to small and mid-market companies. So without further ado, we'll pass it over to you, Adam.
Hey, I'm Kristy. I'm the Small Business Specialist, and today we're going to be discussing ERP selection for small businesses. So I'm here today with Adam Cheatham, and he is the Director of Transformation Strategy, and we're going to be discussing a couple of questions that may pop up as you're looking for new software.
Thanks, Kristy. Inevitably, when a software conversation comes up with a small business, they start thinking ERP. When they start thinking about getting away from QuickBooks, what are some of the first steps that a small business should look at when they're thinking about transitioning into a larger piece of software?
I think there's three that kind of come to mind. One would be budget, always. We want to make sure that as you're moving into a new software, you want to have some numbers in the back of your mind so you're not surprised along the way. Second would be looking at what are your processes. What are you doing today as opposed to what you may be doing in the future? So do you have highly manual processes where it's a lot of papers, a lot of Excel? Good way is, and I know it's something we do, is we help people document what those look like from start to finish. And so when you're looking at a software, we can make sure that the software is going to be able to handle what you're doing today. I think lastly is kind of gauging where your employees are. Are employees coming on board where they know they've outgrown this software and they're ready for something else because they're tired of manual processes? And so I'd say those are probably the three things that I've been seeing lately.
Okay. Great. And as you start seeing those types of conversations develop with some of those small and medium-sized businesses, how do you know which areas you should focus on with your business as far as manual processes? If the answer is they're all manual, how do you know where to start?
They're all manual. I feel like that's easy because you're like, hey, let's automate everything. If, let's say they have, for example, some of their processes are automated somehow because they have a different software that's handling that. What would that look like if there's even further automation to it? Does it make sense today? Or is that something that doesn't? It's just, we'll leave it as how it is.
And knowing that many small and medium businesses like to use QuickBooks, is there a natural transition away from that into a newer system, or there's some early warning signs for you've outgrown QuickBooks, it's time to move? What do you think?
I think there's early warning signs. I think some of the things that pop up would be, especially if they're in manufacturing or distribution. QuickBooks can't handle inventory. It can't necessarily handle, hey, let's create a BOM or a work order, those certain things without additional software to plug onto it. So some of those, it makes sense. Hey, QuickBooks can plug into some inventory management software, but eventually you'll outgrow that if you have multiple SKUs or you're making additional products and it just can't keep up with the volume.
Yeah, and if I'm a small business and I like some of my software systems and I know I'm growing too fast to be stuck in those types of systems, how do I have to get rid of everything all at once? Can I keep some of the things that I like?
Yeah, so one thing that's pretty cool with QuickBooks, if you're not at the point where you've 100% outgrown it, there's the possibility that you could bring on, like I mentioned, inventory management software. You can bring in warehousing software that they have that can kind of help you grow to a point for a while until it doesn't make sense anymore, and then you would need to move to ERP.
And if I know I need to replace QuickBooks, how do I tell the difference between what should go out the door with QuickBooks and what I can keep in place?
I think a good way to think about that is from a financial perspective of what things do you need to be able to close out your books each month, each quarter, each year. Those are the things that you will want to take with you. So, for example, your customers, your vendors, various data points. But then there's also things in there that you may not need. If it's an old customer that you haven't done business with in over a year or 2 years, you wouldn't need to bring that type of data with you.
Right. And as you're starting to think about small businesses that are selecting the software, what are some of the things that you look for in being able to narrow it down to the one software that they should select to replace their existing systems and support their growing business?
So I think first thing is probably scalability and flexibility, as we see a lot. You want the software to be able to grow with you. You don't want to have to go through this process again in a year or 2 years. And then the flexibility, how can different parts of it change as your business changes? So you may be doing manufacturing one way, but then you've learned a new way to do it. Can the system adjust to that as you're growing and changing things within your organization? Second, I would say looking at total cost of ownership. As we know, you want to look at, when you're buying it, what your licenses are. You also want to take into account maintenance, support that may go along the way, and then additional bolt-on softwares that you may have. For example, we always see like a sales tax software coming in, and looking at those costs year 1, also through year 5, is kind of gives you a good picture of what that is. I would say year 1, maybe year 1.5 would probably be the biggest chunk of what you'd be paying. So just something to keep in the back of your mind as you're doing an implementation and the cost with that. And thirdly, I would say looking at organizational acceptance. So kind of like what we talked about earlier is how much are your employees going to be involved? Are they on board with switching to a new system? Are you seeing any adversity between that of people saying like, no, this works fine? Or other people saying, no, I'm struggling because my software is not doing this. So kind of being able to gauge what people's responses are.
Okay, that sounds great. And as you start to think about total cost of ownership, and you mentioned spreading that out over a 5-year period, does that help with kind of leveling the costs and comparing them? Or is there, what's the rationality behind not just saying it's going to cost me this much to implement and this is my first year of licensing and the rest of it is I don't need to worry about because that's too far in the future?
So doing about a 5-year span helps level them out, because you'll see the first, like I mentioned, like year and a half, so we'll just say 2 years, there'll be heavier cost, and then the next 3 are a lot easier to view, because you'll have, it's just licensing costs. You're not going to have all these other added costs in there due to an implementation or maintenance. You may fall off a different support plan and come on to a different one, so that kind of helps balance it out. And I would note too that sometimes a good way of looking at a 5-year is some softwares you'll see they look cheaper in the first 2 years, but then they get more expensive because of how licensing increases. So having a 5-year helps you compare to see those softwares better when you're looking at them.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
We'll be there. I will be there. I will be there. I will be there.
And I know that this whole idea of selecting software, and you start talking about thinking of 5 years in advance, and what am I replacing and what am I not? This can kind of become an overwhelming conversation for small businesses who may still be flying a little bit by the seat of their pants, trying to figure out what it is I do tomorrow. How am I supposed to think that far in advance? How do you help your clients remain prepared for what happens in the future and prevent the idea that this project becomes something that's kind of a runaway project?
I think, like you mentioned, it can be very overwhelming, especially for small businesses. It's a lot to take on as they're trying to take care of the business on a daily basis. They don't always have the resources to be able to do that. And so something we recommend is always having project sponsor, which that could be the CEO, it could be head of IT or somebody in the finance department, but to kind of take that on, and they will direct everybody else of what their roles and responsibilities are. And I think that helps alleviate some of the panic per se that could pop up from other people that aren't as close to the project, and then making sure that everybody's involved from there.
So when you start talking about layering on this project on top of people who are already very busy, how do you manage that change organizationally, and what are some of the tactics that you recommend?
So I think something that's really important is bringing, like I mentioned, you'll have project sponsors within the organization that help that, but then sometimes they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do it, so then it makes sense to hire, somebody like a consulting firm to come in and help manage this implementation process and manage, roles and responsibilities in there and helping with the organization.
And how do I know that it's time for me to start looking at somebody that might be able to help me with this? And why would I hire somebody other than just the person that's installing the system? Can't they do it for me?
Yeah. I think it makes sense to hire somebody when you've reached the point where you don't have the capacity to do everything that needs to be done. You're running a business and you don't have the ability to project manage, or you don't have somebody that's willing to take on that role in the project. And so that's when it would make sense to hire an outside consulting firm to take care of that.
And how do I know the difference between whether or not I'm niche-based as a small business or not?
I think that kind of comes with understanding how you do business. So, for example, if you're manufacturing widgets all day long and it's the same widget, there's nothing special about it, it's more out of the box and any software is going to be able to handle it. If you make something that has, maybe 15 different steps to make this one product, and there's different units of measure, there's products that have to come in, recipes, all of that, that may mean that you need a system that is more within the industry that you are.
Okay, great. As a small business owner, how do I know that I can afford the additional support of an independent firm in addition to my system integrator, who I'm already paying a lot of money?
I think a way to look at it is it's an investment also, as in the respect that it may be more expensive later on if you don't hire somebody in the beginning. You may run into your implementation is getting out of scope. You're running into additional customizations or configurations that you may not have needed, but you didn't know that you didn't need. And listening to, I would say, implementation team, they want to do what's best for you, but then sometimes having a third party helps you may kind of navigate that road of what you need and don't need.
Okay, so from a perspective of the system integrator having all kinds of answers and solutions, and being able to have a partner on my side that can help say, that's not what you need, this is really what you need. I know that's what their solution is, but there are better ones out there.
Right.
Okay, and as you start to think through this conversation of more options, more people involved in this, how do I know who to pick that's going to help me through this process of augmenting my system integrator, acting as an extension of my own team? How do I select somebody to help me with those types of activities?
I think it's kind of going back to what is it that you need, where do you want to be, and then somebody that matches culturally where you want to go. I think that's a big proponent of it, and something that we kind of stress a lot of when we come in to help that, of making sure those things are aligned and meeting and understanding the client where they are.
Okay, and if you're to look at this from a perspective of jumping to conclusions for software, what are some of the more common software packages that you see for small and medium-sized businesses?
I would say like the top 3 that we're seeing right now would be Acumatica, Infor, CSI, and NetSuite be the three. And all of them are cloud-based, which is people are looking for. They're intuitive learning, good with manufacturing, distribution. However, we do see some small businesses that are really niched market, and so those may not make the most sense, and so it would require some additional, investigating of what makes sense for them.
Lastly, if you could offer one piece of advice to a small business who is considering an ERP software and what that means for them, what would that piece of advice be?
I think the biggest thing is you can't afford it. It's available, it's out there, and don't let numbers kind of deter you from that. And being able to know that you can move forward and you're not stuck with a QuickBooks, or you're not stuck with a software that's not getting you where you need to be, that the availability of software is out there for you.
So as we're going through this global health pandemic and the COVID-19 era, how do you address what your options are in the software space and being a bit more digital and transforming your business to support a growing digital experience in the marketplace?
I think this is a great time to look at that. A lot of companies, they've had to navigate new pathway that they didn't have before, either coming from a brick and mortar and they're 100% online, or various ways that they're buying and selling. And I think this is a great time to evaluate, hey, what systems can I put today, because I'm having to futurize my company day by day as things are changing. And how does it make sense to implement an ERP today because of how things are going, because you don't want competition to surpass you. You want to be able to keep up with that. So maybe that means making a change today in the software that you're using.
That's a great point. It kind of leads to the idea of how do I continue to grow in this opportunity for growth. So yeah. I like that a lot.
Thanks, Adam, for your time today. Appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for joining us to learn a little bit more about ERP systems and how they'll work with your small business. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions.
All right. Thank you, Adam and Kristy. Really appreciate your insights there. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about small and mid-market companies and some of the findings that we have, and maybe follow-up questions and discussions that we have from that discussion. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control Podcast, your source for digital and business transformation, lessons learned, and case studies, and general best practices. I'm Eric Kimberling here with Paresa. We just had a great discussion with Kristy and Adam about small and mid-market transformations and digital and ERP types of projects in general. What are some of your observations and questions from that discussion, Paresa?
Yeah, well, I think this topic is so important because I feel if small businesses want to grow, which small business does not want to grow, right? They really need to take a deep look at their technology and where their foundation is. So, when Kristy mentioned that, a lot of businesses use QuickBooks, right? And you're very dependent on it. You've been operating on it. And as you start seeing growth, it's not necessarily the best option for you, especially if you're in a specific industry like manufacturing. So I guess one question that I have is when you get to that point and you're wanting to kind of supplement your QuickBooks, or you're not ready to fully detach from QuickBooks, which best of breed systems integrate well with QuickBooks if you still want to stay on the QuickBooks platform, but still automate certain parts of your business. What would you say to that business? Where should they look?
Sure. Well, as far as just integrating with QuickBooks, I mean, QuickBooks has certain apps that can bolt on directly to QuickBooks, so that's a sort of a low-hanging fruit place to start. A lot of the we'll call it the smaller focus or the enterprise-wide ERP systems that are focused on smaller businesses, they tend to integrate with QuickBooks, or some of them do integrate with QuickBooks. So, for example, if you are using QuickBooks for your financials, but you feel like you need a more robust inventory management or a warehouse management type of system, or a CRM or sales system, then you can, a lot of systems out there have integrations or APIs, they call them. They're basically integration points that you can tie those systems back to QuickBooks. If you find that QuickBooks is fine for us now, it handles the financials and the reporting and all the stuff we need. We just need something on top of that to do all the other stuff within our business. And QuickBooks can't handle those things, and maybe those apps or bolt-ons that QuickBooks offers can't support those things the way you need it to, then that's where you start looking at other potential systems. I will say, however, that most companies that try to go down that path end up replacing QuickBooks or just replacing everything, because usually ERP systems have pretty good financial and accounting technology that's already integrated with all the other stuff. So that's what most companies do. There are some that go through that interim stage that I described, but at the end of the day, what many of them find is, if we're going to go through the pain of this sort of change and putting in new technology, why not revisit the accounting and finance side of it as well and replace everything?
Right. Because I imagine going that kind of best of breed bolt-on route would almost be a Band-Aid. And then you'd have to revisit it maybe in 1 or 2 years. Whereas, I mean, a digital transformation, right? I guess, what's the timeline? You're looking at doing something that'll last you 5 to 10 years, right? Something that you can kind of grow into. You don't want to keep changing it.
Yeah, ideally more. I mean, if you can get more than 10, if you can look at 15, 20 years. I mean, we have some clients that have been on the same technology for 25, 30 years. I'm not at all suggesting you should do that, because they're extremely outdated and they're trying to figure out how to make it better now. But there are, companies that can get, you should be able to get at least 10 to 15 years out of your enterprise-wide technology.
Right. So for these small businesses that are seeing growth, or even medium-sized businesses, what have you seen as the tipping point? If they're experiencing growth and they've just been on QuickBooks, what are some red flags or signs that business owners should be aware of that are flashing at them saying, time to revisit your technology?
Well, I think it's, first of all, important to recognize that a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs ignore those red flags or those warning signs because they're so focused on growing the business, and usually they're successful in achieving that growth. And so the pain or the red light warning from your current systems isn't always the first thing that's top of mind, and sometimes you ignore it until it becomes to the point where you reach this tipping point, to use your word, that you just can't scale without it. So I don't know that there's any one incident, but what I would say is that generally companies reach a point where they're becoming so manual, they're becoming so labor intensive, and they recognize that as a growing company that something's not quite right, or there could be ways to do things a lot better and less chaotically. That usually ends up being the reason why companies look at it. I think why a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs and executives at smaller companies punt that problem in the future is because there's never a good time to do it. I mean, usually it's, you're in the midst of growing and you're focused on other things, and the thought of replacing all your technology just isn't fun, just to be candid. So, but it's something that if you really want to get to that next level, and going back to the previous segment about private equity and merger and acquisition growth, if your goal is to really grow the company and get to those, bigger picture goals, I mean, you are going to need some sort of technology and digitization of your small business to get there.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. Everything is digital. So if you're not pouring into the digital aspect of your business, I imagine you'd stay more stagnant than if you were to do otherwise. Right. So, and then another thing too, I mean, we talked a little bit about resistance during Adam's specific segment, but Kristy mentioned it again in her interview, that a lot of the successful digital transformations for small businesses weigh heavily on how well the team adapted and was open to the change and, kind of welcomed the new processes and technology. So, I mean, it sounds like regardless of the size of your company, whether you're a giant, large company, like the last case study, or you're a small business, there's going to be resistance to change. I guess my question is, how is it different in a small business versus a large company when it comes to organizational change management and identifying resistance?
Yeah, well, I think you're onto it, that the resistance is there in either case, whether you're a smaller company, bigger company, or somewhere between. The key is to, first of all, recognize that, but also recognize that the sources of resistance are different. So the end result of resistance to change is sort of a given, but the reasons for it are different. So with smaller businesses, here's what you don't have to worry about that big companies do. You don't have to worry about these outdated legacy processes that have been around for 10, 20, 30 years. And I'm generalizing here. Of course, if you're a small business that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years, then yes, you do have to worry about that. But for a lot of higher growth companies, they're younger companies, both in terms of the age of the company. Oftentimes the age of the employees are younger as well. And so you don't have the entrenched mentality that's harder to change. That's I guess what you don't have to worry about. But what you do have to worry about, that a lot of bigger companies don't have to worry about, is that you've probably grown through a certain amount of flexibility and entrepreneurial spirit and gunslinging and just doing whatever it takes to get to where you are today and to service your customers and to be successful. And when you start talking about introducing new technologies, you're inherently, by definition, talking about introducing some more standardized way of doing things and more repeatable processes, and you're focused a little bit more on efficiency and scale. And those are very different themes or areas of focus than pure entrepreneurial startup, do whatever it takes, do it however it takes to get the job done. Now suddenly you're sort of boxing people in a little bit, not intentionally, but that's the perception that people will have, is that now you're asking me to use this big, massive system, or now you're asking me to do things on a consistent, more repeatable, more cookie cutter basis. And the way I've thrived in this role, or the way we've thrived as a company, has been to, just to go out of our way, just to do whatever we need to do to, get the sale or to make the customer happy, or whatever the case may be. So that's just a really important nuance of where the sources of resistance come from. But I'd say the resistance is still there. I think people might be a little bit more flexible and willing to change at a smaller company, but they're not going to be as excited about standard business processes and efficiency gains as a bigger company might be.
Right. That makes sense. And I think the source of anything is a big teller to how to resolve it. So I think that's a great point that you make, is if you understand the source of the problem and the source of the resistance, it's easier to mitigate and position your message to your team to help move them along and have them support the change. So that's one element that's different. What else? I mean, just in the grander scale of digital transformation, what else do you see as some unique factors that small businesses deal with in a digital transformation versus larger companies?
Well, again, I think it's maybe becoming a little bit more focused on scale, but not as much as a bigger company, as I mentioned. But the other thing is really, looking at when you think about digital and technology and transformation in general for a small and mid-market company, oftentimes you're going to take a much more customer-centric approach and start with the customer. And I would argue any company should do this, but I think smaller companies, it's even more important and they're more likely to do this, which is you focus on what is that overall customer experience that we're trying to deliver? What does that customer journey look like? And then aligning everything and focusing it on that, instead of maybe not necessarily looking at how do we drive out efficiency gains, or how do we, standardize some of our back office functions and operations, because you may not have that much back office operation as opposed to your more customer facing side of things as a smaller mid-market company. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is that focus on the customer experience, the customer journey. Certainly financials are important. Cash is king for a growing company. So having a clear visibility into your financial metrics, your operational metrics, some of your predictive metrics to help anticipate problems along those lines before they become problems. that's where technology can really help. And I think that's where companies have trouble seeing where or how technology can help them as a smaller mid-market company. There's so much technology out there that can help you provide a better customer experience and create that sort of Amazon feel that, or Alibaba, the Amazon and Alibaba have sort of redefined the customer experience for a lot of organizations. Even if you're not in retail, that's what people expect when they interact with the company. They expect that digital experience combined with whatever human experience or physical product experience you might be providing. So I think it's just really looking more opportunistically is the other thing, is how can technology really help us think outside the box of what we've been doing and provide that better experience for our customers and our employees too.
Right. It makes sense. There's a lot of differences, but still a lot of similarities too. It sounds like as any size company goes through digital transformation. So I think that's interesting. And I'm excited for our event tomorrow, the Full Throttle workshop. I know Kristy's going to be there diving deeper into, specific strategies for smaller businesses. And we have a lot of good content lined up. So that should be a great event.
Yeah, I'm excited for it too. It's small business has always been near and dear to my heart. I had an uncle when I was a kid. I had an uncle who owned a business who's like a serial entrepreneur, and he went out and would just buy these random companies, small scale stuff, nothing crazy or big. But ever since I was a kid, I've always been fascinated by small business, entrepreneurship, high growth companies, family owned businesses. That sort of thing has a place in my heart that's near and dear to my heart. So I look forward to that event too and being part of that, and we'll look forward to working with Kristy on that too.
Absolutely. Hey, that translated to you starting your own business, right?
Yep.
It all trickles down.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. That's entrepreneur spirit is alive and well for sure. Well, thanks for being here today, Paresa. I want to thank our guests as well. Thank you, all of our listeners. Again, our Full Throttle workshop for small and mid-market companies is tomorrow on February 25th. If you're listening to this after the fact, just shoot us a note. We can get you a recording or work out a way to get you a recording to that workshop to see what you missed. And again, if you're enjoying this content, we encourage you to check us out every Wednesday on YouTube, 10 a.m. Eastern time in the U.S., 3 p.m. London, 11 p.m. Hong Kong every Wednesday. You can also subscribe to us and listen to the audio-only versions on Google, Apple, Spotify, Pandora, etc. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Hope you have a great day. In the meantime, take care.